Let's bet that I can get her to marry me." Jonas, a young millionaire from Munich, leaned back and gave his friends a confident look. The table in the exclusive restaurant was lined with bottles of champagne as his friends laughed and challenged him. "You mean the waitress from the McDonald's around the corner?" one of them asked mockingly. Jonas nodded with a grin. "Exactly. Give me 3 months." The next day, Jonas walked into the McDonald's branch with his usual confidence. Marie, the waitress in question, stood behind the cash register and served customers with experienced composure. Jonas went straight to her. "A Big Mac menu, and your name," he said with a charming smile. Marie looked up briefly, raised an eyebrow, and replied dryly, "It's not on the menu." For the next few days, Jonas was a regular at the restaurant. He tried every excuse to start a conversation with Marie, but she remained reserved and unimpressed. Her colleagues giggled in the background while Jonas tried to get their attention. Finally, more out of curiosity than genuine interest, Marie gave in and agreed to meet. At the first meeting, Marie talked about her family, her hard everyday life, and the dreams that she had worked hard to achieve. Jonas, who was not used to such conversations, found himself unexpectedly fascinated by her honesty. But deep down he remembered the bet and the tight time frame. When the 3 months were almost over, Jonas proposed to Marie. To his surprise, she said yes, not out of deep affection, but rather out of a feeling that there might be more behind his facade. For Marie, it was a decision, an opportunity that she could hardly explain to herself. Jonas could hardly believe that Marie had actually accepted his proposal. It was a brief moment of triumph, but as he walked her home that evening, reality began to catch up with him. While she was making tea in her small, tidy apartment, Jonas' eyes fell on the worn furniture and the stacks of bills on the table. "So this is her life," he thought, feeling a fleeting sense of unease. The next morning, the news of their engagement was the topic of conversation among Jonas' friends. "You really did it," shouted Stefan, his best friend, and laughed loudly. Jonas could see the admiration on his friends' faces, but it felt empty. Inwardly, he began to doubt. Was this really just a game? Why did the ease with which they had accepted him suddenly bother him? Marie, on the other hand, experienced the engagement differently. Her colleagues congratulated her, but there was barely disguised envy behind their words. "A millionaire? You really hit the jackpot," one of them said, but Marie didn't feel comfortable with these comments. Jonas was charming and attentive, but something about him remained unfathomable. She wondered why a man like him had chosen her. The weeks after the engagement were marked by contrasts. Jonas introduced Marie to a world she only knew from films. Luxurious restaurants, expensive clothes, and invitations to exclusive events. But the more she moved into this world, the more she felt that she didn't want to fit in. Over dinner at a fancy restaurant, Jonas' friend Stefan made a mocking comment about Marie's humble origins. Jonas laughed half-heartedly, but Marie abruptly stood up and left the table. Later, when they were sitting alone in his car, she asked him directly, "Why are you really with me, Jonas?" He avoided her gaze and murmured, "Because you're different." The answer didn't leave Marie satisfied, but she decided to let it rest for now. In the coming days, Jonas began to take the situation more seriously. He visited Marie more often in her apartment, helped her with small repairs, and showed a new side of himself, one that seemed less arrogant and more authentic. But every time he was alone in the evening, the truth of the bet gnawed at him. Things suddenly changed when Jonas invited Marie to his family's gala dinner. It was a moment that she saw as a chance to get to know each other better. But the glamorous event didn't bring the closeness she had hoped for. On the contrary, she was confronted with mocking looks and derogatory comments about her origins. Jonas tried to ignore it, but Marie's pain was obvious. That evening, when they were alone, Marie asked again, "Jonas, what are you hiding from me?" He looked at her, unable to answer, and felt for the first time how serious the consequences of his actions were. Marie sat on her couch and stared at the phone in her hand. It had been 2 days since the gala, but the hurtful words she had to endure there still rang in her ears. She had watched Jonas' reaction, his silence, his smile, which didn't reassure her, but rather worried her. It was as if he was hiding behind a mask that she couldn't penetrate. But despite her doubts, she decided to give him another chance. Jonas, on the other hand, was in inner conflict. He was aware that the bet had escalated and was no longer just harmless fun. His friends had teased him again the night after the gala, and Stefan, always blunt, had asked, "When are you going to break it up? Or has she become too important to you now?" Jonas hadn't answered anything, but Stefan's words didn't leave him. A few days later, Jonas invited Marie to a weekend in the Alps. He had hoped that the isolation of the mountains could ease tensions. She accepted the offer hesitantly, and when they arrived, the fresh snow and crisp air actually seemed to lift some of the heaviness between them. They laughed together, went on a hike, and Marie told him about her childhood, stories that touched him more than he wanted to admit. But on the second evening, the fragile balance changed. While they were sitting by the fireplace in the small hut, Jonas' cell phone rang. It was a message from Stefan. Asterisk, how long are you going to play this? The bet has long since been won. Asterisk. Marie, who was just entering the room, saw the message on the screen. Her voice trembled as she asked, "What does he mean by that, Jonas?" Jonas' heart stopped for a moment. He had hoped to delay this moment, perhaps even avoid it altogether, but now there was no escape. "Marie, he began, but the words got stuck in his throat. Her eyes narrowed, and she reached for her coat. "Tell me the truth, Jonas." Immediately, he confessed it, the bet, the initial intention, and how he himself hadn't expected that he would actually develop feelings for her. But the words sounded hollow, and Marie looked at him as if he were a stranger. "So it was all a game for you," she said with a coldness that cut him to the core. Marie packed her things and left the hut, despite Jonas' desperate attempts to get her to stay. She took the first bus back into the city, her mind a chaos of anger, disappointment, and sadness. Jonas was left behind, alone with the painful knowledge that he had destroyed everything. In the following days, Jonas tried to contact her, but Marie blocked his calls and messages. She returned to her everyday life, determined to banish Jonas from her life. But deep inside her, the pain was greater than she expected. She had hoped she had found something real in him, only to realize it was based on a lie. A phase of self-reflection began for Jonas. For the first time, he questioned not only his relationship with Marie, but also his entire life. The people around him, the superficiality that he had accepted as normal for so long. Everything suddenly seemed pointless. He knew he couldn't easily win Marie back, but he was determined to change himself, regardless of whether she would ever forgive him again. The days passed, and for Marie, it was as if she was caught between two worlds. On the one hand, she tried to resume her usual life, the shifts at McDonald's, the small conversations with her colleagues, the evening visits to her mother. But on the other hand, she felt a hole inside her that she couldn't ignore. Jonas had disappointed her, yes, but his efforts to understand her and behave differently over the last few weeks had touched her. Was it all really just a game? Jonas, on the other hand, was serious about his self-reflection. He withdrew from his friends, left invitations to parties unanswered, and avoided every opportunity to repeat the old patterns. Instead, he began to focus on things he had ignored for years. He visited nonprofit organizations in the city, got involved in soup kitchens, and got to know people who fought passionately for others despite few resources. It was a world that was foreign to him, but it showed him a new perspective on life. One evening, Jonas visited a community center that offered programs for the socially disadvantaged. To his surprise, it was an initiative Marie had talked about often, a place she had called her refuge before she had had to abandon it due to lack of time. Jonas began helping there regularly, repairing furniture, helping with fundraisers, and listening to people's stories. Little by little, he understood why Marie placed so much value on authenticity and honesty. She lived in a world where such values were essential to survival. Meanwhile, through conversations with mutual acquaintances, Marie noticed that Jonas had changed. A colleague who saw him at the community center told her, "He works there almost every day, Marie. It doesn't look like another of his games." But Marie was cautious. She didn't want to risk any further disappointments and held back. One afternoon, when Marie came home after a long shift, she found a letter on her doorstep. It was from Jonas. No long apologies, no empty promises, just an invitation to visit him at the community center when she was ready. Marie put the letter aside, her emotions a chaos of anger, curiosity, and a faint hope. After several days of hesitation, she finally decided to go there. When she entered the center, she saw Jonas helping an elderly lady repair a shelf. He only noticed her when she came closer. His eyes widened in surprise, but he said nothing, instead letting her make the first move. "Why are you here?" she finally asked, her voice controlled but firm. Jonas put the tool aside and looked directly at her. "Because I had to learn who I really am. And because I wanted to show you that I can be more than the man who hurt you." The two spoke for hours, surrounded by the bustling but warm atmosphere of the center. Jonas explained how much he regretted the bet and how much his time with her had opened his eyes. He made no promises about winning her back. Instead, he stated that he wanted to become a better person for himself. "Whether you ever forgive me or not, I will continue to work on myself," he said. Marie sensed that something was different about him. It was no longer the game he had been playing, but a real change. But she knew she needed time to trust him again. Weeks passed, and Marie watched Jonas from a distance. He did not return to his old lifestyle. Instead, he continued to work at the community center, avoiding the superficial circles of his past and slowly building new relationships. Honest, real relationships. She heard from others how seriously he took his commitment, and more often she found herself thinking about him. One evening, as she was walking home from work, she stopped in front of the community center. She wasn't planning on coming in, but something inside her urged her to see him. When she entered, the building was quiet except for a few volunteers cleaning up. Jonas was among them, sweat on his brow as he sorted through heavy boxes of food. When he saw her, he stopped, surprised but not arrogant. "Marie," he said quietly, and she nodded at him. She went to him without much preamble. "I wanted to see if what I heard was true," she said bluntly. "And?" he asked cautiously. "It seems like something has changed," she replied, her voice a mix of skepticism and recognition. Jonas put the boxes aside and sat on a bench in the corner of the room. He motioned for her to sit next to him. "I know words aren't enough," he began. "That's why I tried to show you that I'm serious. Not just about you, but about my own life. You helped me see what really matters." Marie looked at him for a long time. "You hurt me very much, Jonas," she finally said. "It will take time before I can trust you again." Jonas nodded without hesitation. "I don't expect anything else. I don't want you to forgive me just because I want to. I want you to do it if you really believe in it." The two continued to talk for a long time, and while Marie was still reserved, she felt that she was ready to take a small step forward. It wasn't a complete restoration of their relationship, but rather a cautious new beginning. The weeks that followed were characterized by patience and small gestures. Jonas continued his work, but also kept his distance to give Marie the space she needed. They met occasionally, first in a group at the community center and later alone. Each meeting was honest and reserved, but little by little the trust between them grew again. One afternoon, as they sat together in a small cafe, Marie suddenly smiled. "You know," she began, "I never thought I could trust you again, but I see that you have really changed." Jonas didn't answer immediately, but took her hand. "I promise you that I will continue to work on myself, with or without us." It was a moment of understanding and acceptance. Marie knew Jonas wasn't perfect, but she saw that he was trying to be better. And Jonas knew that he could never take Marie for granted. It was the beginning of a partnership based not on a bet, but on a real connection. Sometimes life shows us that true change is born from pain and honesty. Jonas and Marie remind us that love can only grow if we are willing to recognize our weaknesses and work on them. What do you think? Can people really change? Write us your opinion in the comments. If you were moved by this story, click like, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to experience more inspiring stories. Stay tuned now. The next story awaits you, an emotional journey that will touch your heart and make you think. Click and let yourself be captivated.